Hello, this is a short video about verbs of fearing for Latin GCSE. So, verbs of fearing. By verbs of fearing, what I mean is timeo. So the verb timeo, timere, timui, which means I fear or I am afraid of. So this is the only verb of fearing on the GCSE vocab list. So this is the only verb that we really need to worry about for this video. Now, verbs of fearing, or again, what I mean by verbs of fearing is timeo. Timeo can be followed by three different things. It can be followed by an accusative object, it can be followed by an infinitive, or it can be followed by a fearing clause. And we're going to have a quick look at an example of each one and how that works. So first of all, our accusative object, okay? So timeo can be followed simply by a noun in the accusative, as we have here. So we have time back, we can see the imperfect of timeo, and we have an accusative object here, we have patrem. So this is the thing that the boy was afraid of. So the boy was afraid of his father. Was afraid of his father. Now the only source of confusion here really is the of. The of here does not mean that the father goes into the genitive. The of is very much attached to the verb instead, that we can think of a translation of timeo being I am afraid of. And so therefore his father just goes into the accusative. It is the object of the verb. The next thing that we might see after the verb timeo is an infinitive. So we've seen that you might be afraid of something, but you could also be afraid to do something. So that's what we have here. Timebant, again, our verb of fearing, and we have apropinquare here, which is an infinitive. So what is it that this time the citizens, were not afraid of something, but the citizens were afraid to do something. So the citizens here were afraid to approach the king. There's nothing too complicated, I don't think, about this one. If you see an infinitive, you just translate it like you would any normal infinitive. Our third and final use, or third and final thing that we might see coming after a verb of fearing, after timeo, is a fearing clause, a fear that something might happen. And this is introduced, this is the most complicated, is introduced by the word nay, which, as I've said, you're going to be translating as that. I'm afraid that something will happen. And the verb is going to be in the imperfect subjunctive. Now, although the subjunctive is imperfect, and it's always going to be imperfect for GCSE, we're actually always going to translate this using would. It's always going to be a fear for the future, a fear that something will happen. So we're always going to see would in there as our translation. Now, just a quick recap. Remember that our imperfect subjunctive, so this row here, is formed from our second principal part. So it's formed from the present stem, our present active infinitive parare, the second principal part. And to make this an imperfect subjunctive, we simply add on the personal endings. So our active personal endings to make an active imperfect subjunctive, and the passive personal endings to make a passive imperfect subjunctive. So let's have a look at an example of a fearing clause then. So first of all, let's identify the three parts of this sentence that tell us that we have a fearing clause. So first of all, we have our verb of fearing. We have timuit here in the perfect. We have nay, which is introducing our fearing clause. Remember that we're going to be translating nay as that. And we have oppugnarent coming at the end of the sentence, which is our imperfect subjunctive. And we need to remember that this is going to be a fear that something will happen in the future. So we're going to translate it as would. So if we have a look at our translation then. So first of all, we translate everything up to the nay first of all. Or I've translated it as Regina as the king, when obviously Regina is a queen. So the queen was afraid, perfect, we said, of timuit. So the queen was afraid, and now we can translate everything within the fearing clause that is introduced by nay. We said that nay we translate as that, so the queen was afraid that. Now we translate our new nominative, that the enemy, hostes, nominative plural, that the enemy would do something, that they would attack the kingdom. Regnum there as the object, the accusative object of our verb oppugnarent. So our translation, the queen was afraid, that's our verb of fearing. That is our nay. The enemy would attack the kingdom. So we can see that both in the Latin and the English, we have those three components in the sentence that show that we have a fearing clause. Now, the only extra thing that we need to have a look at is negative fearing clauses. We can occasionally also be afraid that something won't happen. and they work a very similar way. We still have our verb affirming, we still have nay, we still have a subjunctive, but notice that we're also going to see the inclusion of a known. Okay, so this is the only time in Latin that we have nay and known working together. So a negative fearing clause is really easy to spot. And we're going to translate it just like a normal fearing clause, but we need to remember that we're going to negate our subjunctive. So again, we're going to translate everything up to the nay first of all. So the general here, the general was afraid. Imperfect, but perhaps it might make more sense here to translate it like a perfect. So the general was afraid. Nay we translate as that. The allies, and then we need to translate our subjunctive, remembering that it's a negative, that the allies would not arrive at the camp. So again, in terms of the different constituent parts, we can see in the English that we translate them in the same order that they appear in the Latin. We translate our was afraid, our verb affirming first, then our nay, and then finally our subjunctive. And this time, because we have the known in there as well, it would not do something. So to recap, verbs affirming, or rather timeo, timere, timui, can be followed by three things in Latin. Like in English, it can be followed by an accusative object, it can be followed by an infinitive, or it can be followed by a fearing clause that is introduced by nay, negative nay, ... known, and nay is then followed by an imperfect subjunctive. Okay, thank you very much for listening.